Are you crazy?
I can't move my neck mobility's gone down quite a lot. And apparently it's a good indicator of longevity. So the worse your mobility is, the sooner you're probably going to move on to the next step of whatever this is that we're going through.
I think people are more sedentary than they've ever been in history today. I mean, if you think about it, we didn't have grocery stores 1,000 years ago, a couple hundred years ago. I mean, you had to go out, you had to find your food, you had to hunt for it, at least travel to like another town to go get it. Men used to be gone for months, just to provide for a family. Women would be alone in the household for months. I don't think that we're evolutionary used to that. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. That's so insightful. It just sort of made me think about when you said, women would have to stay home and like look after the family while the men are gone for months. And it made me think about how that must have taught women back then mental and emotional resiliency, which women now don't have. A lot of them feel like if they don't have a man next to them, oh, woe is me, and better go find a man who can be next to me, or the total opposite. So anyway, today we have a very juicy, packed discussion ahead of us. And I can't wait to jump into it. Clement, do you want to give us a rundown of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think you're going to be around, right? You don't have to leave early, like you said.
I'm all yours, boys.
Okay. All right. Well, on this episode of Podvocative, we've got three topics we want to go through. And I think, obviously, they've evolved since they were first mentioned in the news. That was like a week or so ago. But I'm sure there's been developments that I know there has been for Dutch farming, which is the first topic that I want to cover with you guys. And then we've got Balenciaga, which was another huge scandal. And I think, that's a massive rabbit hole right there. These are all big rabbit hole conversations. We don't like to do things half-hearted, right? I mean, we're going straight for the most important topics that people want to know about, but they may not be able to get the information that they want on those subjects just by going through mainstream media. So Balenciaga, and I would say even as far as Hollywood and woke Hollywood and even dark Hollywood, let's call it that for the good old censorship algorithms. And then we've got finally, which is I think possibly the most impactful in terms of global repercussions, the China debacle, which I think we're going to be touching on COVID, their policy regarding lockdowns. But, again, this is a big topic and it goes even further than that, so maybe we'll cover more on that too. But in the interest of trying to make this a little bit more professional, I'm going to wrestle with the StreamYard platform that we're using and see if I can pull out some of these extra cool functions while I'm discussing these topics with you guys. So on the Dutch farming topic, let's just dive straight into it. I've got a bunch of notes here. This whole thing is just a huge mess. And I originally got interested in this, maybe a few months ago when I first heard about it. But apparently the whole thing's been happening since 2019. So it's nothing new. And basically it goes like this. The Dutch farmers are now protesting in greater numbers in Holland against their government, because the government is trying to essentially take the farmers out of business, all on the back of this belief that it's because they are causing climate change. They are polluting the planet and the atmosphere with emissions that will, if you really want to take it to the ultimate message that the governments are sending us, will actually end our planet and everyone on it in not such a long time from now. So the fear that we've been made to believe is that our habits, i.e. the food we eat, the traveling that we do, and a bunch of other consumer choices are pushing us toward a apocalyptic ending for the planet and everyone on it. And, it's been a fascinating topic to dive into. There are a lot of people who talk against what the government, not just the Dutch government, but also governments around the world and institutions and organizations like the World Economic Forum, for example, are saying about the climate crisis that we're going through. But you won't hear a lot of those people talking against it because, we live in a world where you have to be very careful about what you say. And if it doesn't match with the overall narrative from mainstream media and from these institutions and organizations and from political parties, then you may actually end up getting that content taken offline, which is, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, if you talked about this with anyone sane, they would have said, hold on, that sounds like a totalitarian society. Hold on, that sounds like no freedom of speech. Isn't that wrong? Yeah, it's wrong. But now we've been so desensitized to it that it's just another day. It's just, oh, my YouTube video got taken down, which funnily enough, our last YouTube video, the last episode got taken down, which if that doesn't say that we know, what we're talking about, then I don't know what would. So we've had a video taken down already because of COVID. We're being very careful about how we structure these episodes. And so we're going to do our best to make sure, we don't get any more strikes. But we're also on Rumble. We're also on other social media platforms. And, we're going to try and get our message as far and wide as possible. But again, back to the Dutch farming crisis. So the Dutch farmers are being put out of business, or at least their farms and their livelihoods are being cut dramatically. We're talking like cut in half in terms of the kind of money that can be made from their activities, which really, anyone else in any other industry, let's say if your salary got cut in half, you would really be forced to make some really difficult decisions like, do I want to continue doing this for a living? Or, should I start looking for another career or another job? And that's what a lot of these farmers are facing right now. And the state wants to buy the land from them. So you could argue that they're giving them a solution that, at least in the short term, gives them some freedom, some financial freedom, and is a little bit fair. But I don't see it that way. I don't know what you guys think, but I honestly don't see how this is a fair situation, nor even a sane situation to be in when we're going through, one of the worst economic periods in the history of our of human history, and it's only going to get worse. So what do? Well, we decide to, in the midst of an energy crisis and a food crisis, almost destroy overnight, because this thing is going at breakneck pace, the second largest food producer in the world, the Holland, which is what many countries call it, Holland, or the Dutch homeland. So I really just don't. I'm struggling to see how this makes any sense. I don't know if you guys have any feedback before I keep rambling on, but
yeah, this isn't something that's just localized to Holland or to, certain areas that are, key for production. But this is also happening in the US on quite a large scale. There's a lot of farmers that are just stopping business, that aren't producing anymore. They can't afford to do it because commodity prices are super expensive. And I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier about the world economy not being where it needs to be. Things are very out of whack. Things are very expensive. There's war, there's human right violations, there's all kinds of things going on around the world right now that's making supply chains very messed up, that have a lot of bad economic policies, that have just a whole lot of shit going on in the world. I don't think it's really a good time for a lot of these people that don't make a lot on the bottom line, especially farmers. The supply chain just eats them alive and sucks them dry. There's no way that they're going to be able to stay relevant during times like this. I think that's a huge factor here in what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And to your point about how, they were at least given money sort of, you were saying, it was sort of a solution to that. They have taken away their ability to self-sustain. And so money runs out unless they invest it in something, but there's nothing quite like being able to sustain yourself with something you've grown. I mean, we saw this in the Summer of Love, I guess, when Seattle tried to be their own autonomous state. They wanted to secede, and they were trying to grow their own food, and they didn't know the first thing, how to grow food. They had these boxes of soil, but didn't know that it took more than just soil and seeds to actually grow your own food. So taking away the ability to grow your own food and be able to live off the land is really a death sentence when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the last time that the government tried to take farmland, it didn't end well at all. Actually, two main scenarios stand out for me, and those are the ones that I was able to kind of look into before this conversation. But that would have been Mao and the land reform movement. And if you don't know who Mao was, he was a crazy dictator who killed millions. And that was actually the movement in the 1930s that ended up killing anywhere between 200,000 people at the low end and 5 million people at the high end. So that's no small group of people that perished because the government felt that it was its almost responsibility to redistribute the wealth of their land. This is a communist, obviously, that was a communist practice, a communist government, and a very, dark time for China. But it was also a dark time for Russia, where Stalin in the same period kind of pushed something called collectivism, where it was the same story. They were taking the farmland from private owners and redistributing it, or at least they were claiming they were, and they were basically putting people to work and pushing for very communist practices. And that killed around 7 million people, according to some estimates. So I don't know, if we're going in the same direction, but let's just think about this logically for a moment. Shouldn't it be up to the farmers how they want to deal with this situation? And shouldn't it be something that the government can, incentivize in more productive ways than moving backwards and kind of falling on very communist approaches to dealing with this existential problem that apparently we all face? So the first argument that I guess we have toward this practice of taking private farmland from these Dutch farmers, and not just the Dutch farmers like Brandon touched on, but American farmers. I don't think that farmland's being taken from them necessarily, but you've got a lot of policies that essentially mean it's very difficult for American farmers to stay in business, rising costs, just crazy climate policies that are being imposed. And then you've got Bill Gates, who's buying up all the farmland that's available, so that it's basically his same approach to every single thing he's ever been involved with, just a monopoly stance, just buying it all up. And then I only found out the other day, without straying too far from the topic, that he's also, or at least the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's, I think, the largest private owner of seeds in a cigar, I think a cigar organization or effort to kind of maintain seeds and their seed diversity. So I don't know where this is all leading, but it doesn't feel like it's leading in the right direction. I would at least like to see some more innovation. I'm going to show you or share with you, or attempt to share with you now, a video. It's the first time I'm going to be doing this on StreamYard, of a Dutch farmer who is speaking against the government takeover, or at least the abolition of farms in Netherlands. And he is talking about how farmers are unable to use innovation. They are literally told that they either have to sell their farms, cut down, or just, just suffer, right? Suffer through this. There's no solutions they can implement that would take them out of the picture of being considered for their farms being purchased or downsized, which is really strange, because you would think if you could come up with a solution or some kind of innovation to cut down the emissions or to reduce the pollution, then you would be allowed to stay in business and operate, or at least even increase if it was an effective solution, but apparently not. So let me see if I can share the screen with you right now.
Meanwhile, our juridical system is on this moment that no innovations in agriculture sector are allowed to use. So there are different techniques for lowering your emission, but when you are asked for a court and a judge will look into your innovations, they will say you can't use it. So the only reason, the only thing to lower your emissions right now is just cutting your herd back. And actually you're probably coming at the main cause of it all. Nitrogen is more like, we call it stick to beat the dog. It's just to camouflage the real cause. Some left-wing parties in Holland and probably all over the world, it's the same movement. They want to get rid of animal industries. They want to have a transition to more plant-based food, transition to vegetarians. We have all the stuff together. In Holland we also have a party like that, and they asked for 50% reduction of our national herd. That's probably on this moment the main cause of it all. We're not talking about nitrogen, no, they just want to reduce the national herd. Well, every farmer all around the world and also every citizen knows that cutting back the herd isn't the cause of any problems. You know, we are producing food. 2/3 of agricultural land on the planet can only be grown by grass, and you need cows like this for making grass into meat or into milk or whatever you want. Whatever problem with emissions, with pollution on the world you are asking about, whether it's not chemical, but farming is probably a part of the problem, but most of it all, it's part of the solution. Well, Dutch farmers now are getting angry every day more. Government is not listening.
This farm basically just said and just explained how even though there are solutions to reduce the kind of emissions and to abide by some of the restrictions and the limits that are imposed by the government, they're just simply not allowed to use them, which blows my mind. It's baffling. Another question that I have for this is, why is it being pushed so quickly? You know, it's almost like there's only a certain amount of time before we can cut everything in half in terms of emissions. There's only a certain amount of time before we can, set up all of these renewable wind farms and these solar panels. And it feels to me that it's being pushed through while a certain group of people are in power because that's their objective, and it may not be the objective of, let's say, opposing political parties. So they have to really get as much traction as possible so that they're able to reach those goals before they're perhaps no longer have power. And I mean, one of the things that we do here on the show is we try to put all of the pieces together. So geopolitics rather, it's quite a complex thing, and I'm not an expert by any means. But when you look at what people say in the public sphere, when you look at what politicians are saying, when you look at what the policies that they push are, and you see how they align with the trajectory of, let's say, markets and economies, it's pretty easy to see where these policies actually assist in the the pursuit of, let's say, these objectives from the left wing, the left woke, the Democratic Party, and in the UK it would be a different group of people. But you can see how when you put the pieces together, really it alludes to a deeper, more hidden agenda. Without saying it, I think you can pretty much guess that we're going backwards when it comes to personal liberties, and we're actually ceding our power to the government. And this, to me, just feels like another scenario where our freedom to choose what we eat how we eat is under attack. You know, you go for the farmers first, you take the farmland, you make it incredibly difficult to access food at an affordable price, which is what's going to happen if they have their way with these farmers. Again, the Netherlands is the second largest food producer in the world. So you can just imagine what will happen when we shut down half of their farms. And we're talking about up to 3,000 farmers are being threatened here, which is why the protests are so strong. What's going to happen in a few years from now? Price of food's going to go up in many countries. The availability is going to go way down. And we're really going to have some serious issues on our hands. So I guess that covers a lot of what's happening with the Dutch food crisis. There are other things that I could go into. I don't know if you have time, guys, but recently, and I'll make it very quick. Recently, in the UK, a couple of let's say territories have recently announced that they will be trialing and testing new climate lockdown policies. Oxford City, which is where one of our major universities is, has announced that they'll be trialing a 15-minute city policy where you divide the city into parts and you say that each part cannot cross into others during a certain time frame. So it's kind of insane when you think about it, and that's all really to reduce emissions, pollution, and to make it a more, as far as I read, convenient and peaceful city to live in. It's just garbage. It's absolute garbage. The last time that this kind of policy was implemented on a big scale, I mean, we're going back to Germany in the early 20th century, right? Is it so hard to believe that we could be leading ourselves in the same direction? When will it be too late to speak up against these things? When will it be too late to educate ourselves and, not be so politically correct? And I know that we aren't a politically correct show so far. We make that pretty obvious. But we're very careful about how we phrase things. And I certainly don't class myself as an extremist in any way. But when will it be too late before we can actually stop this train from really going off the cliff? So the United Kingdom is heading in the same direction as the Dutch farmers. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's a bigger problem than just Holland.
Well, they're starting very subtly. They start with those 15-minute trials to get people to, it's kind of like the 2 weeks to flatten the curve approach. So much so that even when the mask mandates were dropped, people were still clinging on, clutching onto their masks, and it's been ingrained in them. So they're going to start small. That's how it always begins. And then next thing you know, it's going to be a way of life. People just know not to go, not to step foot there. And they're really just limiting our freedoms, our liberties, little by little until they gain total control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is also where... Go ahead.
Just to add to it, the government policy aspect is one thing. There's also an issue with privatization in certain places around the world as well that are causing a lot of issues, such as privatizing water and sucking up lake beds, rivers, streams, places where, farmers, ordinary people would usually have public access to things like that don't have it anymore, that did have it 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's a lot of areas, I think, that are creating problems today. I don't know if it's, the overall corruption, if it's the these companies going in and buying up so much land, buying up so many rights over time. Things seem a bit more centralized, more than they have ever been before, I think. And I think that's another thing that's really affecting the food industry overall. And it's led into a lot of humanitarian issues too. So again, we live in a system today that is very broken, that's built on top of a foundation that wasn't solidified because people got away with doing all these things a long time ago. The government got away with murder, pretty much, being able to put whatever policies they want in place and people not knowing how that's going to affect them down the line in 10 years. companies being able to buy whatever they want to the point where there are no more riverbeds, where there's no more land that's fertile to grow avocados, or where there's too much pollution. So it affects crops, or it affects breathability in the air. And there's so many little things that I think have just snowballed over time. And I think I think we're at a point, like a very important inflection point, where we need to look at where we're at in society, and people need to stand up, and they really need to make this more, they need to make it more aware for people, because I think we just accept it and we don't do anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Here in this country, you know, early 20th century, you know, people had a huge amount of pride in their values, had a huge amount of pride in their culture. But now I don't know exactly the reason why, but it just feels almost like people have given up. Their soul has been crushed and they're just going along with it. And it's frustrating because, you know, I am from this country, the UK, and back in the day, it was totally different. I felt totally different than I do when I come back and I visit now these days. It almost feels like people are willing to let themselves be just trampled over. So I don't know what the response is going to be when it finally gets too difficult for people to cope. I think we're not there yet. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe a lot of these things are happening. The speeding up of the process of destroying what seems to have been a functioning economy, what seems to have been a good quality of life, that the destruction of all of that seems to be speeding up. And I think it's because we haven't gotten, broken enough yet where a lot of us are going to demand change. And when that demand comes, guess what's going to appear? A solution. And that solution is not going to be the solution that's going to be the best for everybody, but it's going to be one. So I hope that we are able to look at this in a logical way. I don't know if we will. I'm kind of a little bit skeptical about that because people haven't had I would say we haven't had the education. We haven't had the critical thinking, reinforcement and the support to be able to look at these problems and come at them with more rational arguments. We're a left or a right. We're a binary approach to politics and all of those things that matter. And we're just our attention spans are at an all-time low, and we're more interested in what's going on in popular culture than we are in how our country or our world is being run. So hopefully we can come together and I don't know. Speaking of the popular culture, moving on to the next subject, or get taken away. What's going on with Balenciaga these days? I know that they recently went through something incredibly controversial.
Very explosive. Spanish fashion house Balenciaga, definitely talk of the town lately because of their latest ad campaigns. And these ad campaigns have been showing children holding stuffed toys clad in BDSM gear. And included in their latest series are photographs that also feature paperwork about child abuse, a book of pornographic nature by an artist called Michael Borman. And he had children in there in just the most grotesque poses, documents on a Supreme Court ruling regarding child pornography, while another campaign had yellow caution tape with the fashion brand's name spelled with 2 A's. Might say it was deliberate to have it spell as Balenciaga, which is, I guess, a shout out to an ancient evil god. So there's been massive backlash all over social media about this, but not much noise or airtime of the same nature on mainstream media. Well, aside from, Tucker Carlson on Fox News, and the only celebrity that seems to have directly addressed this head on has been Kim Kardashian, who is an endorser for the brand. Now, her ex-husband, Kanye West, was also an endorser, but they have cut ties since his anti-Semitic rants. So that's not something he needs to worry about cutting ties with. But the reality TV star and fashion icon had this to say, and I quote, She says, I have been quiet for the past few days, not because I have not been disgusted and outraged by the recent Balenciaga campaigns, but because I wanted an opportunity to speak to their team to understand for myself how this could have happened. As a mother of 4, I have been shaken by disturbing images. The safety of children must be held with the highest regard, and any attempts to normalize child abuse of any kind should have no place in our society, period. I appreciate Balenciaga's removal of the campaigns and apology. In speaking with them, I believe they understand the seriousness of the issue and will take the necessary measures for this to happen again. But despite her statement, Kim confirms she will not be cutting ties with Balenciaga, but instead will be, quote, reevaluating her relationship with the fashion house. Recently, she also received a huge backlash when photos of her very young daughter, 9-year-old North, was seen wearing a GIMP leather mask covering her entire face. A GIMP mask, if for those watching who may not know, is usually worn in BDSM activities. And on a side note, her ex-husband has said that he stood by Balenciaga with all this. It's very strange. It is very strange. But he says, quote, I stand by Balenciaga and denounce all witch hunts, and I cancel culture. Jesus is king. Ending trafficking doesn't start or end with a fashion campaign. The rapper wrote in his archived tweet, since his Twitter account has been suspended. It was suspended a week ago due to his anti-Semitic rants. On another side note, Adidas, along with other famous celebrity endorsers with whom Balenciaga is collaborating, have all remained silent on this issue. Balenciaga has issued a public apology on their Instagram account's story post, which means if it's a story, 24 hours later, it's no longer accessible or viewable. Their statement said, we would like to address the controversy surrounding a recent ad campaign. We strongly condemn child abuse. It was never our intent to include it in our narrative. The 2 separate ad campaigns in question reflect a series of grievous errors for which Balenciaga takes responsibility. The first campaign, a gift collection, featured children with plush bear bags dressed in what some have labeled BDSM-inspired outfits. Our plush bear bags and gift collections should not have been featured with children. This was a wrong choice by Balenciaga, combined with our failure in assessing and validating images. The responsibility for this lies with Balenciaga. They are, however, shirking the blame over to a third party, a production house that they worked with. They are saying that the company has launched an internal and external investigation while they are working to enforce stronger protocols. Now, their leading designers, Laura Volkova, and their creative director, Demna Vasalia, have come under fire for the concept of the ad campaign. A spokesperson for Volkova, because she would not speak to press, said that she left the brand in 2018 and has no participation in the recent campaigns, and also condemns the abuse of children in any form. But if you look at her previous Instagram posts before she went private, you will clearly see she has no qualms when it comes to sexualizing or exploiting children. And she also has no shame about any of her evil, sinister, or satanic related posts. Now, Balenciaga is suing a production company who's behind their spring 2023 campaign, a company called North 6 Incorporated. Now here's the funny thing. They initiated the lawsuit on Friday in the New York Supreme Court. They're seeking $25 million in damages, and as well as the set designer, Nicolas Dujardin. So an attorney for Dujardin has said in a statement to CNN that representatives from Balenciaga were present throughout the entire shoot. They were overseeing everything. They were handling papers and props, everything. And even though Dujardin was a set designer, not a single piece that was on the set or in the pictures were up to Dujardin. They're actually up to the client, which would be, in this case, Balenciaga. And North 6, the production house, was also not present at all. They do not have creative input or control over the shoot itself. So here is where it gets really fishy. They had the lawsuit launched on Friday, immediately dropped on Saturday. And so the Twitterverse has exploded, saying that, they knew they didn't stand a chance. And so they just let it go. It was sort of a complimentary move to say, oh, we're doing something.
Oh, now, they just wanted the headlines, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And Balenciaga's parent company, Kering, also carries a lot of other signature brands. We're talking Gucci, Louis Vuitton, a bunch of other designer brands. And their CEO, Francois-Henri Pinault, who is the husband to Hollywood A-lister Salma Hayek, they've remained silent on the controversy, and evidence has emerged revealing that Pinault is also the president of Artemis Group, a French organization, or conglomerate rather, that owns the British auction house Christie's. It's worth mentioning that Christie's has had a squalid history of selling artwork that also sexualize children. Whether that's a coincidence or not is the question. What do you guys think?
I mean, first of all, what is going on, with the highest levels of society? Why do we keep hearing about celebrities and people who have huge amounts of wealth engaged in activities that are either blatantly pedophilic, if that's even a word, or allude to pedophilia because they're associated with people who have been proven to be pedophiles? So I have my own beliefs, and it's just like a few years ago, this was not on my radar. This was not something I was hearing about every week. Not
That's true.
Much less from groups of people that I looked up to in the past, who I willingly kind of supported because I thought they were doing great things for the planet, or they made great art. But now I'm seeing all of these people come out the woodwork. What do you guys think is going on at that level of society?
I think there's something fundamentally wrong and ingrained in all of this. I think this is a lot bigger than just Balenciaga. And it's weird how this keeps happening too. For whatever reason, especially here in the US, there's no news coverage of all the things that have happened over the years that are exactly similar with popular brands, popular celebrities, influential people being caught up in this, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein, whether it's Pizzagate, whether it's Alex Jones ranting about it on Joe Rogan and no one taking him seriously, whatever it is, this keeps coming up. This issue with pedophilia, this issue with child sex trafficking. And Balenciaga is just the latest thing to come out where this is happening. And it's scary in a lot of ways because I don't believe in coincidence when things add up like this to the point where you're seeing it this frequently and at such a high level. It's not like some random person was doing this, or we're talking about trafficking in Latin America, or something that isn't connected to people with a lot of money, that have a lot of power, that have a lot of influence, that are in government, that are leading some of the biggest or most influential organizations in the world. That's the scary part. So there's definitely something that's going on here behind the scenes, and the fact that they don't cover it more wholesomely is also crazy. I don't really know where to go from here with Balenciaga. It's another thing I think that people are just going to have to stand up on at some point and speak out about even more. But, again, the problem is they get censored, they get shut down, their accounts get throttled. And even people like Kanye West, who are incredibly popular, have massive followings. Even they get censored and shut down. And so it's like, who's going to stand up for this stuff? Who's going to make it right? Who's going to call this out? When are we going to ever learn the truth? Are we going to learn the truth?
Yeah. I feel like it's almost, coming out because we've got this woke movement which sexualizes kids. And so all of a sudden people feel maybe a little bit more relaxed about it, and if they slip up, or maybe it's even purposeful. Maybe there's a test on people. You see how much they're willing to get away with, or imprint on people that children can, and maybe even from certain perspectives of theirs should be sexualized. I just find it incredibly disturbing. And I never thought that I would be sitting in front of my computer in the evenings sharing content because I want to protect children. Like that, who thinks that? Like, I want to be out with my friends. I want to be doing fun things, but we're locked in this kind of weird, just depraved situation where our carers, well, maybe not carers, but at least the people that are supposed to protect us and lead us aren't doing something about this. I mean, Twitter was taken over by Elon Musk not so long ago. And he has shown that the previous owners and the previous managers of Twitter had allowed so many thousands, tens of thousands of accounts that are all about the trafficking of children and the sexualization of children, pornography, to continue existing on the platform, while at the same time, people who are fighting for freedom and fighting for the truth are being canceled. Now, that to me is evil. That's just pure evil. And I would say it's even gone as far with this whole thing about kids as to push me in a conservative direction, where I looked at myself as a very liberal person a few years ago. I looked at myself as someone who craved independence and individualism, and I wanted to express myself through my own personal freedom. I wanted to travel, and do all these fun things and not worry about community or family or so much. I had no plans on getting married. Had no plans on all that kind of thing. But I'm sitting here with a symbol hanging around my neck that I wouldn't have worn a few years ago because I just didn't believe in it. And I started to realize there's something deeply wrong with our society. And for this thing to be happening in front of our eyes, and for no one who's in a position of power other than the select few to be doing anything about it, is just pushing people to, I think, go back to their roots, go back to community, go back to conservative values, because the onus is on us now. It's crazy.
It's worth considering. Years ago, someone had predicted this when the whole transing of children began. Well, even before transing the children, when the transsexual, revolution or uprising began years ago, they started transitioning to, no pun intended, they started transitioning the whole transing to the children. Someone had predicted that, next thing you know, they're going to normalize pedophilia. And there came this term, MAPS, minor attracted persons, which they said, this is going to be used as the new term to humanize pedophiles. And they're saying, pedophile is such a harmful term. It's so hateful. Excuse me. And so let's drop that term. Let's stop using pedophile. We'll call them minor attracted persons. And look at us now. Today, they have these books that contain, instructions on how to perform fellatio between kids, fellatio between an adult and a child. And they have these in libraries that are accessible to preschoolers, to toddlers, to young children. And if you follow Project Veritas, one of their latest exposés was the dean of students in a school. I forget which school it was. They were passing around sex toys. They were passing around dildos and butt plugs to students. And when he was confronted by James O'Keefe, he just ran into the classroom, into the school. And parents who were within earshot were upset. They said, "Excuse me?" And James O'Keefe said, "No, well, your dean was passing them around." She was upset that James was saying these words. And he said, "Well, we're just reporters trying to find out why the dean of students was allowing the passing around of these sex toys." So really, they do start, you give them a quarter and then they take your entire arm. You give them your hand, they take your entire arm. So it starts small, and next thing you know, they're targeting children. And, not to go off tangent, but there is something to investigate about the creator of Rick and Morty, because I stumbled upon something recently.
No.
Yes. But we could save that for our next reporting so that we're really ready with all the facts. But it is.
Don't ruin my favorite show.
I'm sorry. No. I didn't ruin it. I didn't ruin it. I don't want to ruin it. I have never gotten into it. I tried watching it. Some episodes were really funny. But for some reason, I just could not have the time to really watch it. But then I stumbled upon something that made me rethink the entire thing. And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to rethink it at some point too, Brandon.
I want to hear your opinion on that for sure. We should definitely save it for another episode.
Yeah.
But man, no, the thing I liked about Rick and Morty so much is it made fun of everything. It was very agnostic.
Like the Family Guy.
Yeah. And I love that kind of stuff. I love Family Guy because there's no boundary. Or South Park has been infamous for that. Infamous. Nobody's safe is
Nobody.
The old adage.
Yeah, there's a list of people that apparently, it's been whistle blown that have visited, Epstein's private residences, whether that's his island or his New York townhouse. And there are names on that list. I'm not sure if it's a real list. Again, it came from someone private who's close to the subject, apparently. And there's a bunch of names on that list that I'm so disappointed to see. And so, but on the other side of it, you can make the argument, and I think you should, because you shouldn't, maybe jump to conclusions too quickly until it's proven. A lot of people who visited his island, or I don't know who visited his residences or flew on his jet, let's say. I don't know. I mean, you would like to think that a lot of them didn't have bad intentions and they were really just on business or networking. So who knows? I hope the truth will come out one day soon. But there's a lot of people in entertainment that, again, just like this Rick and Morty show. I mean, I love that show. I would hate to hear how he's been involved in things that he shouldn't have been involved in. That's terrible news. But it wouldn't be the first time I've been disappointed by this kind of thing, to be fair. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like Bill Gates flying to Jeff Epstein's island 50 times or whatever it was in a row. Would he even fly 50 times to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president if the president wanted to meet with him? 50 times is a lot when you think about it. Who's really going to do that? And he's a busy guy, I'm sure. So something's weird about all that. Logically, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So that, again, these are all rabbit holes. I know we're going to be talking about them again in a couple of weeks. What's going on with China and China's zero COVID policy? Oh my God, this makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah. So here's another rabbit hole. So for the last few years, I think for a while, but especially over the last few years, there's been a lot of serious human rights violation reports in China. Especially atrocities targeting ethnic and religious minorities within the country. But more recently, however, have been the human rights violations that have to do with the crackdown over the protests for the COVID-19 restrictions and their zero tolerance policy. This is going on in a lot of different cities, from Beijing to Guangdong to Shanghai to Wuhan, where it originally broke out COVID-19 for the first time, and plenty of other cities across China. There's protests right now that have been going on in direct response to a very specific incident where there was a tragic fire in one of the cities where at least 10 people died in relation to COVID-19 restrictions, and were blamed for the poor rescue attempts that took, I think, over 3 hours to put out the fire and save the people. The reason this happened is because due to their zero tolerance policy, they've been locking down buildings, certain areas, even barring doors, not letting people leave their own home, their own residence, not letting them go to the store. And in this specific incident where this happened, they were locked inside and they weren't able to leave, and a fire broke out, and it, again, took 3 hours to put out and extinguish, and 10 people were killed. After that,
why would it take 3 hours to put out a fire when there's no one on the roads?
I believe they couldn't get in after they locked it up, because some of these buildings they would chain up or
they welded them shut too.
Or welded them. I know you have a friend that had an experience with this as well, Hillary. So maybe you can kind of talk about that too. But it's been absolutely horrible. And then because of these protests, the CCP has gone in even further by trying to crack down on social media and with censorship, media, even from media personnel. There was a guy, Edward Lawrence. He was a BBC journalist. He was beaten by the police and detained for hours for trying to cover the anti-government lockdown protests that have been going on. China's doing everything that they can right now to cover up what's happening, and that's why you don't see a lot of it on social media. But there is a lot of unrest. People are very happy. They're unhappy. They're in the streets right now trying to advocate for overthrowing the government. They don't want it anymore. They want out of that system. They want new governance. And
that's the real reason that they're being kept indoors, right?
Exactly. I think it's a lot more than COVID right now. I think it's control over the populace is what they're trying to establish right now. There's a lot of other issues in China too, including with devaluations with the currency. They have riverbeds and lakes that are completely drying up. They have huge climate issues, huge pollution issues, a lot of businesses that are running dry on capital. There's demolitions happening left and right, buildings coming down. It's a massive economy, second biggest economy in the world, but still the people are unhappy. There's a lot of suffering, and the human rights violations just keep going unchecked. And I think, the COVID one is really highlighting that. And unfortunately, and not enough is getting done because of the pushback that China is creating right now with the UN. And they have their own union that they're setting up called BRICS with Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and India, where they're trying to start their own global currency. They're trying to start their own economic trade routes. And I don't know if this is a way for them to create an exception so that they can do what they want, because China likes to have control over their economy and their populace, and they want to do what they want. They don't want to be told what to do. So again, it's another thing that's happening in the world right now that's very concerning, and something that no one's really stepping in and saying needs to stop. There's a lot of pandering. There's a lot of, being too nice to Xi Jinping. I think it's just sad. I think when you look at it and you look at the people that don't have any help, and most of the world doesn't know that it's going on. Like little bits and pieces get leaked out, but they don't know the severity of it. So I really feel for the Chinese people right now. And I don't think they have a choice.
Yeah. There's a few things that I think are noteworthy to mention when you say that, no one really is doing anything about this. Obviously, China is a powerhouse. It's competing for the number one spot in terms of the number one economy in the world, number one influence in the world. So it's very difficult to stand up against a power like that. But on top of that, you've got Chinese money flowing into the West, flowing into, countries that on the surface look like they're very much anti-China, or at least having everything pushed through China, in terms of globalization. But underneath, they're taking this money and they're taking these favors. And it's almost like, when you, for example, someone does a favor for you and then they're not the best version of themselves. Maybe you feel like, a little more averse to saying so and putting them in their place because they've done you a favor. And so the art of reciprocation is basically, I need to be nice to this person. I feel like that's a lot of what's happening right now, because you saw, if you watched a video from, I think it was the COP27 conference recently of the leaders around the world meeting to discuss carbon and pollution and all that kind of thing. Justin Trudeau was captured on camera having a meeting with Xi Jinping and his advisor or his translator, and really got put in his spot, got put in his place, got told off. And you saw him leave that meeting as the camera followed him, looked like he was a lost little boy and just had his ego completely obliterated and didn't know where to go. He just disappeared into the background and just went away. I mean, what kind of a leader is that? That's not a leader. That's a puppet. That's a little boy. You know, he's Canada's prime minister right there. And like before, we've mentioned, we put the pieces together of the puzzle. The way that Canada is being governed right now is very similar, eerily, to the way that China is being governed right now. The way that they've cracked down on those protesters, the way that they are, restricting bank accounts, the way that they're, I don't even, this is for another episode, but the way that they're all of a sudden pushing, euthanasia. I mean, what the hell is going on with Canada?
Yeah, just really quickly on that, I don't know the last time either of you've been to Canada, but every single year, Canada gets more and more closer to Chinese than it does American. And for a long time, America has kind of helped dictate a lot of what Canada has done, a lot of the laws they put in place. Like Canada's always looked up to the US as like big brother in that situation because both got independence from Britain. So there's a bit of a relationship there. But China, more and more every year, there's more Chinese people moving there, more Chinese influence. People pay in Vancouver, BC with Alipay, with WeChat, like the same way they do in China. They had terminal systems before they even had them in the US. It's much more Chinese than you think. And I think that China has a large influence on that economy right now. And Justin Trudeau is kind of eating out the palm of his hand.
Yeah, I did see that video of Trudeau with his tail between his legs as he scampered off after being redressed by Xi Jinping. And, to your point, Brandon, I do see that it's so much more evident now. And, there are talks about how Canada really is the testing ground for what they're going to do next to the US. So with China already, CCP and with our hands in every cookie jar in America, they're buying so much land here in the United States. It is not going to come as a shock to those of us who are awake to what's going on. But many people will have such a rude awakening when they begin to see that, how did this all happen? It happened because you were distracted by things like TikTok. And I know we brushed up on this before where TikTok, which is owned by ByteDance, if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, they show very different content in China. For the teenagers, they show them science projects. They show them, videos that promote excellence and striving for the best academics. Sure, they have zero social skills, but, they are not afraid of hard work and they understand the value of integrity and excellence at work. Whereas the content being pushed to, the Western countries is very different. It's twerking videos, it's violence, it's dumb trending things, so they're dumbing us down and they're doing an excellent job of destroying us from the inside out.
The number one video that I have on my social media right now is a video of a group of women in a jacuzzi twerking.
I saw that.
Exactly what you just said. It's literally what you just said.
It's everywhere. I mean, look at our military. Who was it who said this? It's from this movie, Died Suddenly. She is I think she's a lieutenant colonel, and she's in the medical field. She was saying, in about 5 years, the United States will not have a standing army because of everything that's been going on with the poke, of course, and then the transing and just the demasculinization of our men in the service. So I think a lot of those are intertwined. The dots are definitely connected.
Here's the question. Should we ban TikTok? That is becoming more and more of a hot topic. And I know a lot of people in the US obviously don't want that because that's where they get their daily dopamine intake. But still, I really do think that there's something there when in one country it's promoting growth in a populace and in young people, and in another it's detrimental, almost like it's being done on purpose. And it probably is. I do think that there's a case for either banning TikTok or forcing some kind of policy on it. Because I don't think it's healthy. But especially if it's being done to undermine us, then yeah, we need to talk about that.
I think there's a few different ways you could come at that problem. So the first way is you could outright ban it, but I don't think that would have the effect that those people banning it would want. I think that would just cause problems and backfire. I think another way is to have some kind of independent investigation that puts it on paper exactly what the problem is and why this is a serious threat to the health of nations where the content just totally destroys people's ability to think for themselves. But I don't see that happening either, because what we just said, that the power, the money, the favors, all of that kind of thing, the people who can really move those kinds of studies and reports are the ones who are taking the money from China. So I don't think that's going to happen either. I think the only other way to do it would be to, because essentially what you're doing is you're asking a group of people who are addicted to stop taking what is they're addicted to, and you can't do that with people who take heroin. I mean, not really. Can't do that with alcoholics. It's got to be something that really flips some paradigms. So I think probably the best way to do it is to bring it out of the shadows. Individuals can speak out and show the reasons why, not just TikTok, but in general, social media as it stands today isn't doing them any favors. And then give them an alternative. Give them Twitter. Give them something that actually gives them what they're looking for, which is a better quality of life and more sovereignty.
Well, to the point of addiction, there's really no gradual quitting. You quit cold turkey, and then that's that. You deal with the withdrawal symptoms, because there's no saying like, oh, I'm just going to smoke one stick of cigarette per day, and well, I'm just going to shoot up this much heroin today. Like, there's no gradual pulling back of that. And I mean, look at what Tim Cook said. He was threatening to take Twitter off their app store, but TikTok was going to get to stay. And everybody knew the whole connection between TikTok being a form of Chinese surveillance, or a way to kind of, spy on us and use our information. And it creates another problem of, well, how come you are keeping TikTok, which we already know is exposed as, a way to get content and data from US citizens and military and all that, but you're going to kick off Twitter from your app store because Elon Musk is suddenly freeing information for people to access, is very fishy. And they're starting to show their hand. If it's a poker game, it's not good.
I think it's money. I think they're getting paid somehow. The same thing happened with Coinbase around the same time that happened with Twitter, because Apple wants a cut of the money that Coinbase is making, like some really stupid stuff. So there's a bit of a centralization issue there. I don't know, maybe Apple has become a monopoly in some ways for apps, for being able to have access to certain types of information, content, and vehicles on your phone. I guess there's maybe something you could look at there. I don't know. Plus with Twitter and with Elon Musk, buying Twitter, I think it's now kind of pushing this ground a little bit more. Now you have a social media platform that probably and truly will be open to whatever. And I think that's going to start making people ask themselves these questions like, is there an issue with Apple? Is there an issue with Amazon? Is there an issue with TikTok? I'm hoping that these conversations come up more, because Elon's always been like one of those people to really push for it. And he has the money. He's like one of the few people you can't quite censor. You can't quite shut down, because he's playing both sides of the game. He has government contracts. He's building out highway systems and roads under roads. He's building out boring tunnels. He's very influential, even in China. He has like an honorary citizenship in China because he's building out factories there. The guy's in everybody's pocket. So I'm very curious to see how some of this stuff plays out with social media, how it plays out with free speech, how we talk about issues. So we live in a very interesting point in time, I think.
Agreed.
Well, that's a good place to, I think, wrap things up. That's been a really great episode. I think we covered a lot of what's been happening in the last couple of weeks. We missed a lot because every day is just a huge, overwhelming mountain of new stories, new developments. And so I'm sure on the next episode, we're going to cover a lot more juicy stuff. Thanks for watching and listening. If you've gotten this far, make sure you click the like button, subscribe to us, and comment, and share with us any thoughts about your feedback about the show. We always want to improve. And I'll leave it there. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.